Alright, I have been looking forward to this project all week. Today, we're going to DIY a platform for the Tacoma that also has storage for my table. So I have definitely missed doing DIY projects on a vehicle. With the Jeep, it was pretty much already built out. There was nothing much left to do to it, but with the Tacoma, we have a clean canvas to do some really cool stuff. So today we're gonna build out a platform for the Tacoma to solve three problems that I've had ever since we started camping in this thing. So number one are these ridges that are on truck beds. They're horrible when you're climbing in and out, you're kneeling on it, you're sitting on it. After a while, these start to hurt, and having a platform that's just flat is going to be way more comfortable for the family when we're getting in and out of the camper. And the second is this table. This is my front runner table, which I've owned for years and I've absolutely loved it. I love the thin profile on it. It's not like one of those thick tables, and it doesn't take up a lot of room. But what was great before is this used to just slide underneath the roof rack of the Jeep, and it was out of the way. It didn't take up any cargo space. But obviously I can't do that now because I don't have a roof rack that can hold this. So what I've been doing is I've just been putting it in the truck bed. I would throw everything on top of it. When we get to camp, I got to empty everything out just to get to the table. Or I throw this on top of all of my other gear, and then it's kind of just rattling around and moving around all over the place. I want to build something here where we can just slide this underneath. It's out of the way. The gear is not even touching it. And when we get to camp, it can easily just slide out from that platform, and it's going to just be easier to access, and it's also out of the way, and it has its own place. And then finally, just having a platform gives me a base to build off of when we do the rest of this camper. I can do a drawer system. I can put tie downs for the fridge. Basically, it becomes our new floor that gives me just the space and a way to organize how I want this camper to be set up in the future. So let's get to the store, let's buy some materials, and let's get building. Alright, so here's where we are. Got two pieces of pretty thick plywood. I believe this is 0.75 or 0.7 inches thick. Based on my experience with the Jeep before and building out platforms, I want this to be as thick as possible because I want to minimize the warping, especially because we're going to be stepping on this and everything. I want it to be as rigid as possible. Now, the size I was able to find was 4 feet by 4 feet. I would have loved to have found a 5 by 5 so that I don't have to have it in pieces. Alright, so I'm going to interrupt from the future real quick after we've already built out the platform because I need to show you a mistake I made that I didn't account for. The issue was I bought two 4x4 pieces of plywood because that was the largest they had at Lowe's, and I figured, all right, I'll just do it in kind of a couple of pieces, and as long as it's held down by these frames, it should stay rigid. So right now underneath this is a frame made of 2x4s, and that frame runs all along here, cuts across over there, and then comes right back down to here, and it's just the right size for my table to slide underneath. See, the problem with putting a table underneath this thing that I knew from the beginning was that I can't put any kind of framing underneath this area because it'll get in the way of the table. But I figured if I get at least one frame on one side, one frame on the other side, and one frame at the top, that'll keep it somewhat secure. And I still believe that. But the issue I had by buying two 4x4 pieces, the table is actually longer than 4 feet. So the frame is actually right there, which means this piece of plywood couldn't go on that frame. Only this piece can. And now I'm getting warping. So that's the problem now, is that I'm seeing this thing warp. But I did go to Home Depot and found they had a piece of plywood that was 4x8, which means I now have a piece that's big enough that can cover the entire truck bed from front to back. I did have them rip it for me though, because 4x8 was just way too big for me to take home. And I had them cut this to a 5x4, and then whatever's left over is probably 3x4. So I'm going to keep this for another project in the future. But this is going to be our main piece, and it's big enough to go fill the entire truck bed itself. You have to understand the truck bed is what, 5 feet from the front to back and then 5 feet from side to side. This one is only 4 feet from side to side, but I don't need it to be 5 feet. I'm going to show you what I have planned for that later. All right, so why am I showing you this? Well, one, to show that I'm human, and humans, sometimes we just don't see our mistakes, or mistakes pop up that we didn't account for. And two, it's because I want you to keep this in mind when you watch the rest of the build, so you can see where I'm actually creating it the original way with 2 pieces of plywood on top and why that didn't work out, because we're actually going to replace that top with the big guy over here. All right, back to the video from the beginning. So first thing I had to build out is the frame. Here I'm just measuring, then cutting some 2x4s that will run along each side and on the back. Then using the table as a guide, I can figure out where to put the backside piece that will act as a stop for the table. Using a corner clamp, I can screw the frame together, ensuring that all corners are 90 degrees. Now I'm adding smaller pieces to extend the frame to the bed walls on the left side. The right side won't have this, and I'll explain a bit more later. Now I'm just repeating the same process in the back. Alright, quick update of where we are. The frame is pretty much built out, so you'll see I have this huge cavity here for the table. It's way bigger than the table itself, so we're going to be building rails here that the table can slide into, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that, because we're going to get a little bit fancier than what I've done so far. Over on this side I have supports here, and I didn't really put like 2 screws in each one because it's not really needed. Once the platform goes on this and the whole thing gets screwed into place, it's going to basically be secure. And then I did the same thing in the back, that way this thing doesn't slide forward. And then you'll notice I didn't do anything here. The platform will actually stop like right here, and we're going to take advantage of this well. I don't want the platform to go all the way here so that I still have access to this stuff, because we're still going to need this plug over here and this little cubby area over here. So I still want access to that, so we're not going to bring this all the way. But now we're going to go and try to figure out how to do this rail system for the table itself. Using my table saw, I'm going to create rails by cutting a notch along the 2x4s. This cut is slightly angled to accommodate the sloping shape of the bottom of my table. Then I'll turn the 2x4s and run another cut that meets up with the first cut, creating the rail shape I want. Now I'm setting both rails under the table to figure out where it'll go. I'm leaving some room on the left side so I can use that space for a long piece of gear like my camper window panels. Now it's time to secure those rails to the frame, and I figured it would be much easier to do it off the vehicle. Once I had one side secured, now I can put the other rail in place so I know exactly where that will go as well. Now after securing that rail to the back, I went ahead and added a thin piece towards the front to keep the rails from drifting apart whenever I slide the table in and out. And then finally, I'm lining the rails with strips of the soft side of Velcro. This will protect both the table and rails from constant friction when sliding in and out. Alright, so here's where we are, and I'm actually really liking how this turned out. Got the frame all built out over here, and now I have this rail where the table just slides in really nicely and it stops over there. And then I have an open space over here so that all this is still pretty much clear. And then now I also have an area where I can slide in my clear window panels. Now comes the fun part. We are going to build the top. Using my old bed liner as a template, I can create the actual shape of the platform, making sure it curves properly around the wheel well. This would have been tough to create without some sort of template, so I was fortunate to have this bed liner to work off of. Now, as I mentioned before, this was the original way I had it, where the platform would be in 2 pieces. It'll be remade later as 1 piece. Now it's time for a test fit. I placed it on first and then measured the front part that needs to be trimmed off. In hindsight, if I would have just traced that bed liner from the back, I wouldn't have needed to trim that front, thus making it large enough to reach the back frame and would have prevented me from having to remake it. So yes, it would have been possible to make it with 2 pieces that are fully supported by the frame had I foreseen the problem. Here I'm just cutting the second piece of the platform that will go towards the back, but again, you can ignore this. I have the platform all built out, looks nice and neat. Even like right over there, the cut was really good. Very, very minimal gap there. So I'm really proud of how that came out. Now over here, I did put a corner clamp because for some reason, this 2x4 over here kind of goes cockeyed like that. And then I checked way over there to see if where I may have messed up, but it was all perfectly square. What ended up happening was this 2x4 starts to warp as it comes like to the front. So I used the corner clamp to basically force it into a 90-degree angle. And then once we get some screws in there, that should hold it in place just right. I also put a 2x4 over here. It's not basically bolted down to anything right now, but this is just going to get screwed into the frame. This is important because we're going to put a face on the front of this. So it's not just like this open thing. I want it to look nice and neat. And then that face is going to basically hinge up so we can pull the table out. Problem is, if I hinged this whole thing, these bed stiffeners get in the way. Like it's just going to hit it. So we're going to put a piece of plywood trim over here to make this nice and neat so you don't see all this exposed stuff. Then it'll be an open well for my clear window panels here. And then the actual hinge, the actual door is going to stop like right here. And then that door will extend to right about here, just enough for the table to come out. And then we'll trim up the rest as well to make that part look nice and neat. So just one, basically a hinge going from here all the way to here for a door, and everything else will be buttoned up so that it looks nice and neat there as well. Now before I paint, I'm going to establish where I'll be screwing down the platform to make sure the screws don't miss the frame. I'm using my countersink so that all the screws won't be bulging from the top. Now I'll screw everything down. Again, this was the first version I made. Once it was all assembled, I removed it from the vehicle, and now I'm adding those trim pieces to each end. Then it was time to sand it down to make sure it was nice and smooth. For the paint, I'm using bed liner paint from a company called Raptor. I've used it in the past and I love the texture it creates. But spoiler alert, this time around it ended up leaving paint dust even after it dried, so I ended up switching to Rust-Oleum's Bedrack liner paint. Honestly, I'm not trying to be perfect here because months from now, after I build out drawers, most of the platform will be covered anyway. The areas that won't be, I plan to put carpeting or vinyl flooring to make it more comfortable on our feet. All right, jumping back to the future real quick, we have our new platform built out, and I think this one is just way better than the two pieces I had before. Not only is the quality of the plywood much better, so it's smoother, but now that it's one piece, this whole thing can now rest on the frame, and I can screw it down onto the whole frame, drastically reducing any warping. We won't get that warping back there anymore. The only thing we might get some warping over here, because this is where the table slides in, so there's no support underneath this area. But once I put that cover, hopefully that'll help kind of keep it supported. The cover is going to be on a hinge, and that'll rest on the ground, so hopefully that'll keep that from warping as well. But we're going to go ahead and put this in and see how it looks. Using the old platform as a guide, I can transfer the screw holes over so that it screws down in the same spots I had before. Now to keep the platform secure to the truck bed, I'll be using 4 tension bolts, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. This made having a molly panel so convenient as I can hook it onto anywhere. And then finally, it's time to create the door. I'll be using a piano hinge that I cut down to size so that it lifts up smoothly. With the door functioning properly, I added a latch that will keep it closed. It's hard to check where the latches should go when the door is closed, so I added paint to the latch bracket so that when I close it and open it back up, that paint will leave a mark telling me where I need to attach the brackets to. And with that, we are done. All right, I'm not gonna lie to you. I am so happy with how this thing turned out. I mean, I basically now have a platform that I can build off of. I can put drawer systems, I can mount stuff to it, whatever I need to do in the truck bed to make this a really awesome livable space. We now have the platform for that. Plus, bonus, I now have a spot for my table. It's out of the way. It's not going to rattle around with the rest of my gear. It's just in there. And as soon as we get to camp, I just got to open the tailgate, open this up, take that out. And that could be one of the first things that comes out before all of my other gear. I mean, obviously there are a couple of places for improvement. For example, the trim over here is just a little too short. And there's a huge gap between that trim and where the plate opens up. So it just looks a little funny to me. I mean, it did take me a little bit longer than it should have just because I had to redo that platform. Having it in two pieces was just not gonna fly. I'm glad that I went with just that one big piece because now I don't have any warping. The whole thing is secure and sturdy. Plus, with the 4 tie downs that we have, this thing is not going anywhere. This thing is not bolted down to the actual bed at all. It's using those tension bolts, and those tension bolts are enough. And plus, if I ever need to remove this, I just gotta remove those tension bolts and this thing can come right out. And then when we get a drawer system built out and everything like that, this thing is not going to go anywhere. It's going to basically be secure because those drawer systems are going to be attached to the rails and everything on the bed anyway. Now, as far as the paint job on this, I actually switched paints. This is usually my go-to. This is the Raptor truck bed coating, and I've always liked this because of the texture it leaves behind. But for some reason, this time around, this was leaving like black dust particles on my fingers and on my knees and on my feet. And this was after it had already dried. So I don't know why it was leaving that kind of a mess behind. So I switched over to the Rust-Oleum truck bed coating, which is actually cheaper. It's $10 less than this thing. And it coated really nicely. And when you kind of touch it right there, it's not leaving anything on your fingers or anything like that. So I actually like this a little bit better than this. But that's it. I know you guys have been asking for DIY projects for a while and get outside of the review stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I had an absolute blast making it. I hope it gave you some ideas. Now it's off to making some drawers.
Does anybody even see me?